that nation. And if you any of you guys will go to Norway for the IJF conference, please let me know and we can have a chat. Okay, let's get started. So our session name is Sustaining Journalism, a fresh take on media viability in the age of AI. So we have some agendas. First of all, and Walter van Tonkeren is our CEO, and he will introduce to you guys who we are and what we do. And we have a special guest today, is Courtney, and she will deliver a keynote speech regarding to the beyond the Silicon Valley channel, how local media can navigate AI disruption. And after that, Sana and Bruce. Bruce is a professor from University of Utrecht, and they will present a ongoing research we are doing. And after that, we will have a short panel discussion. And and after that, we can have some networking and drinking in the garden. So this is the agenda of today. So I would like to give the floor to our CEO, Walter van Tonkeren, and to introduce who we are and what we do. Thank you.
Thanks for the introduction, and welcome all for making it open. Of course, very much welcome to our guests and our speakers. RNW Media, for those who do not know who we are, RNW stands for Radio Netherlands Worldwide, so we used to be the Dutch International Broadcaster, shortwave radio. We've been doing that since 2000 until 2012, and then actually we had a radical shift in the strategy of the organization. We became a media development organization, very much working with journalists, but also content creators that were bloggers or citizen journalists, and helping them give form and give shape to digital-only media outlets in the most restrictive settings in the world. So we've been doing that for more than a decade. We've been successful in establishing public interest media outlets in countries like China, India, Mexico, Nigeria, Yemen, under the hardest conditions. We were quite fortunate to do so with the institutional support of the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So as I just said to some of my colleagues here, is that we managed to fail many times over. And that actually allowed us to learn a lot. What does it mean to reach an audience that is going to Facebook to find this information? How do you work with a journalist that is inclined to write long reads, to use a format that is Facebook? And at the same time, by using a different and an ever-changing digital media landscape, how do you engage your audience? So we've experimented with that as RNW Media, but also very much with our partners. So Facebook turned into Instagram, turned into TikTok, turned into YouTube channels. How do you continuously, as a content creator, as a media professional, how do you move along? What do you learn? So one of the things that is also quite fundamental in what we learned, and that is also very much shaping in who we are today, is that we always put the audience first. So in everything we've done, we always ask the journalists and the media makers, who do you want to reach? So in that sense, you need to be very targeted in the type of information you're sharing, the channels you're using, and also the formats that you're using. And by always putting the audience first, we learned a lot of lessons. So these days, as RNW Media, we're doing three things. We continue to work with existing media outlets and bring them all our lessons learned and continue to learn together. But we also created a community, which is called Divine, which is shaped out of the organizations we've incubated, the organizations we work with, but also out of the 10,000 alumni that we've trained through our training center. So we had a training center since 1968. And with that community of media professionals, we continuously ask themselves, what does it mean to be a media professional in 2020? But more so, that's the research you will be seeing, what does it mean to be a media professional in 2025? So in the last couple of days, of course, we've all been discussing big bucket phrases like media viability, information integrity. But what we always do, we go back to the media professionals themselves and ask them, what does it mean to you? Same with the introduction of AI. And then the third thing that we're doing is, of course, very much try to advocate for the changes that are much more happening at an ecosystem level. And we do so by very much trying to hold big tech accountable in the European space, and very relevant for today, lobby where we can to ensure that there's more structural funding going towards media, public interest media makers. So these are the three main things we're doing, very much based on the lessons we've learned. And that's also why we decided to organize this side event with these fantastic speakers in this amazing art gathering. So welcome.
Thanks, Walter. And okay.
Hope to bring my iPad, but I was running late. Are you good to go?
Yes, and but before that, maybe I can give a little introduction. I know, Courtney, you are already kind of well known in the industry, but I still want to give some introduction. So, Courtney is the director of the Center for Journalism and Liberty of the Open Market Institute. And by the way, she was ranked as one of the 100 brilliant women in AI ethics. And I think today we are talking about the media viability and AI. There is no way we can talk about media viability and AI without looking into the context, looking into the world we are living in, right? I think one of the biggest news happens from the end of last year until now is what Trump and Elon Musk did in the United States. Because of the funding from US aid cuts, and also because, for example, recently the Voice of America was shut down because of Trump. And we need to really understand what is actually happening in the United States. And we have Courtney to give us more insight. So let's give a big applause to Courtney. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. Really delighted to be here. I've been working with RNW since we did something in Tunisia with bloggers back in 2012. So, gosh, that's a long time ago. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about what the situation in the United States is, and then going into some of the AI relevant stuff. So, first off, I think all of you, if you want to go to the next slide, you know that there is massive editorial interference and restricted access in the United States. This is affecting all media, including foreign journalists. We have the Trump administration leveraging government bodies to limit press freedom. We are seeing a restructuring and redefinition of what independent media is, creating favored treatment around certain media while restricting access to others, barring the Associated Press from the White House, from Air Force One, leveraging their power to shape the editorial decisions of news organizations like what they call the Gulf of America versus the Gulf of Mexico. We are seeing this replicated at the local level in terms of denial of access and retaliation. And that raises the possibility of government-aligned media shaping the kind of international and editorial decisions in the US, and also on foreign journalists who want to maintain access in the United States and continue to report. So that's a very real threat. We have also seen a lot of threats against journalists at the borders, not just journalists, but also tourists, despite having the right visas. The visa or entry waiver does not guarantee you access. You have to be really thinking about this. I think a lot of groups are no longer doing conferences there. Hatred or criticism of Trump is being equated with terrorism. We know that a French scientist had his phone searched at the border. And of course, we have a loss of funding and support for international media through USAID. You have the closure of the US AGM, the Association for Global Media, which runs Voice of America, RLE, Radio Free Asia, etc. And one of the problems with this is that they did not only restrict and deny funding, they have also twisted the propaganda to equate this type of support with terrorism, with propaganda, and that is then providing support to authoritarians around the world, which I'm sure many of you are well aware of. Furthermore, through the elimination of the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda and actually words, we're erasing women, we are erasing Black people, we are erasing trans, anything that is not essentially a white male dominant position, which has implications, again, for everyone's work around the world that has any sort of funding or support from the US, because you're now at risk if you are doing things that are reporting on gender or aimed at gender diversity or any of those sort of issues. And more broadly, you're seeing attacks on funding and research throughout the academy, restrictions and reductions in scientific funding, and of course this normative revisionism. We're also seeing the use of regulatory authorities to weaponize and retaliate and punish independent media, as well as corporate media. And so we have seen this in terms of investigations into editorial choices, even by the biggest news organizations in the world. And when they are not standing up, like ABC or CBS, they're not standing up to these threats, because he's essentially saying, we're gonna block this very valuable merger over here if you don't essentially pay the bribe and admit to wrongdoing on this editorial choice about debate or DEI or any of that. So if we go to the next slide, what we see is that there is truly a new geopolitics of AI and technology. So we all know that we have been constrained for a long time by American tech platforms, through which much of the work that media development does depends on Facebook, depends on Twitter X, depends on Google search, depends on YouTube. You are bound by their monetization policies, by their content moderation policies, and I think that there has been a lack of focus on these issues as policy issues that need to be corrected in the West, where these countries or where these companies are based and that have jurisdiction over those policies. And so, you know, all this emphasis on innovation without taking into account the fact that now we are not only using the platforms that are dominated by these US companies, which are now essentially merged with the US government and reflecting their priorities, this is also taking place with AI. So you all know when we talk about AI, it is many things and nothing. So if we talk about large language models, for example, which are the foundation models that are the basis of all of the AI systems that are being created, most of those are dominated by US tech firms. We know that Grok, which is Twitter, Musk's AI agent, has a specific ideology embedded in it. We saw, for example, Google try to correct for some of the biases in its models, which resulted in, for example, images of black Nazis, which is not only disinformation, but like historical revisionism, but then they need to correct for that. What are they correcting towards? How are these ideologies now of the United States around, now we have requirements that our Smithsonian Institution, our museums, only portray a positive vision of US history and how we've treated people in our country and elsewhere. So I think we have to be very thoughtful about how you are integrating AI into your newsroom, how you are integrating AI and these foundation models. Furthermore, we talk about AI, we tend to really think about like the content side of things. AI includes the cloud. It includes the infrastructure now on which artificial intelligence is built. So we have 67% of the cloud market is dominated by 3 American companies, Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. So you have very limited choices. That means not only in terms of what you pay, but I think that if we look at how some of the infrastructural level companies have acquiesced to government pressure or to public pressure in the past. So you may remember many years ago that Cloudflare, which is a digital security provider and hosts about 10% of the web, kind of controls access, but they're an infrastructural level company. Or the Kiwi Farms issue, where they've asked infrastructural level companies to restrict access, to cut off access, to act as essentially content moderation companies. I think we could see this in the AI field as well. So you want to be thinking about who are your cloud providers, where's your infrastructure base, what are you using as services, and what models are you using. The fact is that you see these restrictions on ownership and ensuring viewpoint diversity are no longer kind of a priority for the US, and that could have pretty big repercussions, as we've seen, for example, with Bezos, the Washington Post deciding to only publish certain types of editorials that are in line with Bezos's ideology. I think that we have to be very cognizant about what the next slide is titled, which is the Orwellian turn. And that is now we're seeing that regulation in other jurisdictions is now being equated with censorship. So now you have the Europe Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act, efforts in Brazil around AI governance being labeled as censorship. You have efforts to impose digital taxes and, exert jurisdiction over one's own information spaces being equated with censorship, being equated with anti-Americanism, which means it's only going to get that much harder to exert any control over these companies, which of course we know are now basically ponying up to Trump and giving into his crackdown on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We saw the erasure of content moderation policies that are designed to be able to moderate content that is, related to hate speech or other things around diversity, equity, inclusion issues. We're also seeing data erasure. And that's a big thing because actually US government data, government collected data, is used by journalists around the world. And of course there are lots of access to information and open government initiatives that the US government has helped support. I have no idea what's going to happen to those, but don't count on them lasting. Furthermore, this data erasure is both in terms of data sets, but also in terms of words and terminology. And so this is going to really reshape what we're reporting on, how we can put things into context. And so we need to be, I think, aware of that and getting out in front of that in your own countries. We know that there is learning happening around the world by authoritarians. Now our government is one of those governments. We're already seeing, for example, some of the border issues and kicking journalists and other, pro-Palestinian people out of the country. I think that you should assume that there will be data erasure in countries where you work and think about how do you mitigate against that? How do you download data sets? How do you make some of those redundant, get at least the past types of things backed up? And we're also seeing that there is interference on business models and the economic basis of journalists' organizations. So for example, there is a Federal Communications Commission. Our media regulator is doing an investigation into commercial funding of our public broadcaster, which is like 1% to 3%. But that nonetheless means that this whole effort that we have in this community around pluralistic sources of funding, trying to have some public funding, some commercial funding, etc., is under attack because now they're saying essentially if you want if you get public funding and you get commercial funding, then you must not need the public funding. So kind of beware of that. And when we talk about the artificial intelligence and manipulation, we also have to realize that Elon Musk now has unprecedented access into government data bases, not just private information on individuals, but also proprietary government data. He is now using that to train his own AI company, which you may have heard actually now bought Twitter. So Twitter and his AI company are now merged, and he is infiltrating the US government system. All of your grants that you got from USAID or from DRL, or that you ever communicated with a US official, most likely is now part of this training data. It is now in Elon Musk's hands. And you should assume that any communication going forward with any sort of US government entity, but even potentially anyone in the US. We, for example, we have already had our records subpoenaed because of our work with the US Trade Office. And I think that you should assume when you're communicating with US people that may in fact be the case. I want to go on to the next slide to get more into the AI situation, because while all this stuff is happening at the governmental level, you've also got the rapid development of artificial intelligence. So most of the litigation happening around the world is happening in the United States. There are a couple of other cases elsewhere, including one I'm really interested in India. But 31 cases are in the US. Most of them are based on copyright infringement. And I'm focused on the input side because that has to do with our economic models in journalism. So if you think about these main cases, they're essentially looking at training models. But now, does everyone know what a RAG is? A retrieval augmented generation. Okay, so retrieval, if you think about it in a very simple term, the AI foundation model is created from vast, unprecedented amounts of data, which companies have essentially claimed the right to scrape off the internet just because it's there. and not paid any compensation, no credit for that data. Then the retrieval augmented generation kind of goes out there and finds more relevant, more timely information. It could be from the open web, or maybe it's only from your data, lots of different kinds of models. Most of the copyright cases are around training data. I think there's a much better case for RAG because we have very high fair use bars, but there are 4 prongs for fair use. One of which is, did you have the right to take the data? But another one is market replacement. And one thing that's, and I'll get to this in the next slide, but the market replacement factor is something that we're now seeing RAGs especially are a market replacement because they enable Google's generative search or OpenAI's chatbot to spit back the latest information, even though they're built on relatively static models. We're also, the DMCA is the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, and that basically is our Digital Copyright Act. That is why we have notice and takedown systems on platforms. So I know many of you work with media partners who have had a DMCA notice where there was a claim of copyright made, and we know that that has been weaponized against media. Well, now we're trying to leverage it to say you removed these digital tools to prevent copyright violation. It's unclear whether that's going to work. The copyright case, there's one case, Ross versus Reuters, that actually came out in support of the media side of things, but it was pre-generative AI. But nonetheless, they basically said training data, using training data to build your models is not fair use. So we're hoping that will extend to generative AI. There's also this idea of contract breaches. How many of you are working with your partners or have media organizations where you have a terms of service? Raise your hand. How many of your terms of service prohibit crawling for AI scraping? Okay, so immediately you should add that into your narrative terms of service. How many of you have updated your robots.txt to prevent scraping and crawling by AI bots? Anyone? Okay, immediately, like as media development folks, that is like a top thing that you should be doing. And there are sites, for example, Dark Visitors, where you can basically plug into their list of bots and it will keep it updated to block those bots. That's important because we need to show that you need an opt-in, permission-based, consent-based approach to allowing AI web crawling. Because otherwise they're saying, no, it's out there, it's on the web, we know that these robots can bypass paywalls, bypass subscription, and we need to make sure that we are making it harder for them to just take that information. There are some other cases on privacy and trademark and right of publicity that don't affect the media as much. But if we go to the next slide, the reason it's important that you put that in your terms of service and in your robots.txt is because there is actually some good news. Shocking. There is a burgeoning AI content licensing marketplace that is emerging. There are more than a dozen companies that have sprung up to create a market where AI companies can come in and get licensed, permissioned data and content. Some of those are free to publishers. Some of those are offering a 50-50 split. Some of them are only for training data or only for RAG. Some of them are for both. So right now it's a very dynamic marketplace, and we need to cultivate this market and show that it is a viable, a market, because that is the 4th prong of fair use, which is market replacement. Furthermore, there's lots of opportunities, if you go to the next slide to wrap up, recommendations for what you can do in kind of the short term and then more strategically in order to take advantage of some of these new opportunities. So one, as I said, is implement bot blockers. I think also you need to think about a license litigation legislate strategy. So you need to get on board with, try out these platforms. A lot of them work in multiple languages. Most of them are based in the US, but many of them will work in other countries. They have the ability to do that. Most of them not in the global south, but I'm doing that research right now to figure out where those opportunities exist. So try it out, see how much you can earn, see if it, what is the value, because we also need to establish the value of journalism in these systems in order to even either make deals or get fair compensation or set up the licensing market. You should also try to document AI regurgitation of your content. So, you can look at some of the lawsuits that have been filed, and then you can replicate that in some of these models to see if any of your content is showing up. If it does, then you could do something like send a cease and desist order, or you could get together and tell your lawmakers or lawmakers in other countries that have more jurisdiction over these companies, hey, these companies are training on our data without permission, and they are publishing copyright violative content. And I think that's important because we need to have more litigation against these companies. One of the reasons that Napster, the free music sharing platform, died and why there is a pretty viable digital music industry is because it became cost prohibitive for Napster to fight all these battles, right? That's one aspect. But that's also not enough. We need legislation. So part of this is we have to combat this license to learn. AI is not learning, it is stealing, it is copying, and then it is regurgitating. And AI is not human. We need to get rid of this anthropomorphism of AI and really combat this idea and advocate for an opt-in consent-based text and data mining. Many countries do not have as kind of comprehensive fair use protections as the US does. We have done a study in all of the countries that were looking at news media bargaining codes or considering some sort of legislation along the lines of Australia and Canada to do an analysis of kind of what are the opportunities. So that's something you could do in your own countries, is see, what is the legal framework there? Because now you have the AI companies filing official documents and telling the Trump administration that if you enforce copyright, it is a national security risk because we will lose to China. So, coming back full circle, I think that it's really important that we need to kind of take both some short-term actions and some strategic longer-term actions so that we are both collaborating and working on these three prongs of AI legislation, litigate, and license. And I would just add one more thing, which is learning across jurisdictions and building a network within your communities with other content creators. We see in Denmark, for example, they have one association that represents 99% of the creative industry. In the UK, there is a broad coalition that represents all the publishers, the creative industries, artists, musicians. They did a big public campaign called Make It Fair as the government was doing a consultation on AI and copyright. And that's been very important for shifting the narrative. We don't know how it's gonna pan out yet, but it's really important because it's gonna only get harder as the US equates AI with national security, and these companies are very smart about making exemptions from copyright a national security threat. So I hope I didn't go too long. I think that was about 2 minutes. And happy to answer any questions for this whirlwind tour of the US and its impact around the world.
Thank you so much for continuing to provide such an insightful, insight from the United States. I do have a question. At the same time, maybe there are some questions from the audience. Let's start from my question. You didn't mention China, and I don't see a lot of Chinese people actually in Perugia, but I already come from China. And last night I tried DeepSeek, and clearly DeepSeek is still working in Italy, because I heard there was a news that the Italian government tried to block DeepSeek. But anyway, so my question to Courtney is definitely this content licensing market is definitely something we need to look into. But at the same time, I know I saw news in January. It mentioned that OpenAI signed a deal with 19 publishers from the United States, from also Spain, I think also from France. They are claiming that they are supporting the local journalism. To me, that's not really compensation to the copyright. That's more like they initiate some program or project together to support the local journalism. To me, that's another mechanism we should look into. Can you give some insight on this?
Yes. So OpenAI is taking a book from Meta and Google and doing the same sort of thing where they are co-opting the community and dividing it. So first of all, individual deals are not scalable. There are a handful of big tech companies that kind of own the AI and control the basic AI infrastructure, but there are thousands, hundreds of thousands of consumer-facing applications that need access to data. So, when we talk about AI, we can't only talk about this handful of companies. OpenAI has gone and made deals with only the most global players that are likely to sue them, and then they've been strategic in making it with one, usually one, maybe two publishers in other countries, which means that they don't need any other data really from that country. And I think that many publishers are concerned about getting a deal now while they can, while there's money on the table, and not thinking about the longer term implications. But we know that's not scalable, and we know that that is very detrimental because that then divides the community between those who have the deal and then maybe aren't so interested in pushing for copyright because they have deals, although not necessarily in the US that's not the case, but there's also many more deals there. And it's not support for local media. That's just not accurate. First of all, search referral traffic generally is way down. The referral traffic from chatbots and generative search is way lower. It's between 10 and 20%, or 1/9 of what Google search traffic is, for example, on Perplexity. So there's no way that will ever replace that. And we cannot let them once again take this mantle of like, oh, we're helping journalism. Like, we don't want your help. Honestly, I hope people do not take OpenAI credits. I hope they don't do what we did for Facebook, Meta, and Google, where we invite them in, they give us a pittance, but meanwhile, their market power creates an unsustainable market for journalism, right? If we can't reach our audiences without them, we can't monetize without them taking monopoly rents from that advertising exchange. We can't exist now without those platforms. So when we invite them in as partners, they're not partners. We are their vassals. Like, this is digital colonialism, right? We're just on their feudal land as long as they allow us to, and then they can decide, no, we're not doing fact checking anymore. We're not doing Google News Initiative payments anymore. And that's why we need the legislate strategy. So that, yes, do the licensing with these licensing exchanges, but then create a policy framework that makes that a viable market. Because you won't see that market sustain itself if these other companies just get to take copyright data for free and not pay for it. Otherwise, why would some companies pay for it and others not?
Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Before we move on? Any questions? Michael?
I don't have a question. I only wanted to add on to the excellent points you just made, Courtney. I'm curious what you think. Maybe this is more or less what you've already said, but I'm under the impression that these deals that they made with publishers was just to cover their own asses because they took so much of that data for free without actually paying for it. So they violated the publisher's copyrights of their own material, and now they're just trying, oh, sorry, here's some money, don't sue us, kind of thing. Is that right or not?
And you can already, yes, that is right, and you can already see like there's kind of the Microsoft camp and then there's the Google camp. So New York Times is suing Microsoft and OpenAI, but not Google, right? It has a deal. And so we have to be careful because again, that's going to divide, and then that allows them to conquer us. And I would say on the China DeepSeek thing, so that's a very important issue because it showed that this narrative about like how expensive and how much data and energy it costs to create these models is not accurate. and that actually competition can increase innovation. It can create more sustainable, environmentally friendly forms of innovation, as we saw with DeepSeek, right? But to go back to my point about thinking carefully about what language models you're integrating, do not ask DeepSeek about Tiananmen. It will not tell you, right? So, you know, it's a very complex system where you have to think about, I think in our reporting also, how we convey what AI innovation is, how AI should be used in the newsroom. Too often it focuses on like AI ethics and like, let's tell people we're using AI, but that's not nearly enough. And we need to keep it in a rights-based framework. Ethical and responsible AI is an opportunity to alleviate ourselves from remedies. Rights come with remedies. Ethics do not. Responsibly do not. There's no international frameworks for those. So we also need to help reorient that discussion around rights so that we have access to remedy. Otherwise, we can talk forever about who's ethics and what does responsible mean, etc. So, I mean, there's a lot here, but I think also part of it is working with your partners to report better on this. And then the last thing I would say also is currently, the science shows that if you train AI systems on synthetic media, which is content or data created by AI systems, it will degrade and collapse over time, which means that they need access to a continuous supply of fresh human-created data. That is probably going to change as the science improves. Already they can do it with synthetic math because math is right or wrong, much more difficult with languages, right? And also, let's not get into this language around hallucinations. Like, it is perpetuating disinformation. It is promoting propaganda, right? And another aspect when you're advocating for things in your country is you don't want to encourage, if you don't enforce copyright, then you're going to have everyone putting their websites behind blockers. They're going to be trying to prevent web crawling. What does that do? That means that all the shitty information is available. That means that the junk news, the Russian propaganda, the American propaganda, these low quality information sources are going to be overrepresented in the training data. That is not good for anyone. That's not a public interest outcome. And so there's lots of arguments, there's lots of frameworks that we can use to reorient the debate and to get away from this idea of inevitability according to how Silicon Valley has defined it.
Okay, thank you so much. And we heard a lot of insight from the United States, and now it's time for us to look into international. So the response to this USA foreign aid cut is we are not living in a golden era of journalism, right? But the response to this global crisis, RNW Media, together with the University of Utrecht, we are launched research together. We look into the media viability and AI. So I would like to invite Bruce Musvaro, the chair Media Politics and Global South from Utrecht University, and also Sana from RNW Media to present our preliminary finding from the research. Yeah.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm so sorry I can't stay. I have to go do my other panel, but thank you. And I'm going to
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can speak loud enough. But so hi everybody. As Lee has mentioned, we have been conducting research on media viability. And what we want to really do is center our community, center the Global South in the conversation, and that is what this research is going to be looking at. The perspective of people on the ground, people who are in restrictive settings, and also the challenges that they're facing. We asked you a question when you were registering about what you think are some of the financial challenges in independent media. And we're very happy to say that some of the things that you have addressed and you have sort of marked as challenges are the ones that we want to also be looking at. So for example, about lack of diversified funding, what are some of the challenges? What about the cuts in international development? But also looking at limited access to digital infrastructure and trust and credibility. And that's something at RNW Media we're also looking at, about how we can ensure that we have safe, inclusive, and reliable information and digital ecosystems. And so what I'm going to be doing is just presenting some of the initial findings, but I will give it to Bruce, who's going to speak a little bit about the literature review and the more theory and the academic side of it.
Thanks, Sana.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, it's really an honor to be here. I would like to thank my colleagues at RNW Media for this opportunity and partnership. I think it speaks to the collaboration that I always think it's lacking going into the academic conferences. You never really see people coming from practice, and also vice versa. So I think with all the challenges we're facing in the media environment, I think the more we speak to each other, the better, because otherwise I think we're just going to be stuck in our own bubbles. So media viability, I mean, there's a lot of information available, of course, online, and what we are trying to do is to try and come up with something hopefully that's original, or maybe that is a little bit different from what is already there. That's really the goal. That's what we're trying to do. And what we see, of course, most of this also comes from my own research, working in journalism in practice, but also in theory in the Global South. And what you are really seeing is, for many people, it really comes down to how do you strike that balance between, ensuring your own future, but also having journalistic independence. Now you see that for many organizations, or many organizations don't exist anymore. In many authoritarian context, journalism has died, and many journalists have lost their jobs. And what you also see, I could give you an example of how some journalists in sub-Saharan Africa, after they get fired, they go and work as a mechanic, but maintains a Facebook or a Twitter feed to actually still practice journalism. I mean, it's you could say journalism or activism, but that ensures that they work somewhere else, they get their money somewhere else, but they still they still do journalistic work, which I think is really is still quite important, particularly in those authoritarian contexts. We all talk about sustainable business models. What I've also seen in my work is business models. The only business model that exists is the fact that there is no business model, right? Some of it is just, let's just do whatever works. Let's just ensure that, there's going to be some form of survival. And what you actually really see here is, if we look, for example, at these rankings, the press freedom rankings, I think it's a very good sign to actually see, or to show us, that there is really a lot to learn from the Global South. Many countries in Europe or in the West, they are ranked lower than, I think East Timor is the first country from the current one. East Timor was ranked the 20th. You've got countries like Namibia, Botswana, South Africa, Mauritania, ranked much better than the US or the United Kingdom. I think this is a story that, we should not enter into media viability with this idea of stereotypical or colonial mindset of there's nothing to learn from those people. I think when I looked at the program, for this festival, which is international festival, I was thinking, where are people from Latin America? Where are people from India? Where are people from Brazil? Where are people from Africa? Because, these challenges we are faced here in the West today, these are challenges that these people have been dealing with for many years. And you've got to engage them, you've got to listen to them, because otherwise I feel if we are talking about media viability and we only think about the Western context, we are actually, it's a big miss. We were talking, I'm sure we saw with COVID, how when COVID started, nobody really knew what was happening. And I saw journalists on CNN interviewing some journalists from Sierra Leone. I think for me personally, that was really poignant, right? To actually see Sierra Leone, because they have been Sierra Leone journalists who have been covering Ebola. They actually understood maybe this crisis more than journalists in the West. So I actually think it's time perhaps to also really think about what are they doing there. Those people work in very tough conditions because there is no journalism independence, but still you see some critical stuff going out. And I think increasingly, we are going to be faced with a situation where, what is happening there will probably also be happening, or we could say the remnants of that is already kind of happening in the West. So it's good to start taking those guys a bit more serious than that, just thinking like, oh, we colonized them, they don't know anything. Because I've seen that they really have survival strategies to go to the third, to the third point. Sorry, son. Yeah, that they are really, thinking about. They think about ways to survive, and there are many ways, for them that they think about to ensure that there's that sort of surviving strategy. And it's not always about resources. I mean, this is what you see in the literature. Some of these people have nothing, but still they are producing journalism. So I also think it's about time for us to, instead of just crying out of Trump taking away USAID money, for us to be dynamic and think, how do we survive? Because that's also part of media viability. Because sometimes you need to be challenged to be able to actually think, to be able to come up with new ways. And I feel that sometimes people have gotten really lazy to think, we can just get money from somebody else. And now I think it's an opportunity to show the world that journalism can survive. And journalism is not always about money. I mean, we need resources, but some are doing it without any resources. And of course, financial sustainability is really important. But the point I'm trying to drive home here is it's also about context. We cannot think about universal media viability. This is something Sana and I have been talking about a lot. Thinking about, we need to consider context, the importance of context. We can't just produce this thing that is the whole world look at us, it looks like this, because every country is different. Brazil is different from Serbia. Serbia is different. So it's nice to have all these trends internationally, but when it comes down to really speaking about what is happening, truth to power, we need to think about the context. Next slide, please. Just doing quickly, because of course we have 15 minutes only, unfortunately. Traditional advertising revenue, we all know this, but we also see that this is also part of a Western crisis. I remember taking some journalism students to India, and there they were saying like, it was in Bangalore, we visited some newspapers, and they said, what we're still doing is we actually survive on advertising revenue. So it was for me or for the student, it was like, how are these people doing it? Because in the West we don't do this anymore, So I think there's something to learn from those people, again, to have an interaction about how do we do this, or what can work for us, for our context here in the West, that is working there. And of course, financial viability, media governance, where also there are a lot of challenges. Some countries still use the authoritarian model. There is no, press freedom doesn't exist. as we all know. So how do we ensure that journalism is still going to be in existence in those contexts? What you really see is there are people turning to, for example, AI. You see that in Ethiopia. Recently in Ethiopia, I met people from Hack Check. It's a fact-checking organization, which they use AI. I mean, I hadn't expected that people were using AI in Africa for fact-checking, and they are actually doing it, and it's working, and they have an interaction. This is actually the way that they fact-check information, and it's happening in countries where you would think like, wow, it cannot happen here. Maybe I'll skip the digital transformation because I think we all know about that. But I also think the last point I want to make is, how do we engage the audiences? How do we speak to the audiences? Because what we are also seeing in many of these contexts, for example, what you see is Malians based abroad, for the research that we're doing in Mali, they actually fund journalism in Mali, right? By actually supporting initiatives, because they don't want Russia to take over. There are people who are pro-French, who think Russian presence there is a threat to journalism. So they will put their own money from their own savings to try and ensure that there is media viability and the future of journalism independence can be guaranteed in Mali. So these are some of the challenges they are facing, but again, challenges present opportunities. I'll hand over to my colleague Sam.
Thank you, Bruce. And I think that's...
I don't know what you're clapping for. It's not necessary.
And yes, so I think to continue in the same way, we are also looking at media viability in the way that we've defined it, but also we want to center the people, and we want to center our communities that we work with in what they see as media viability. So for us at RNW Media, media viability is defined as the ability of public interest and independent media to sustainably operate in a way that ensures financial health, independence, and the capacity to facilitate mutually beneficial partnerships and movement that serve pluralistic and diverse media and promotes democracy. And that is really the launching pad for us, and which we're trying to also center the people around it. So what our partners are saying is we're only viable when our community still listens, not when we hit 100K followers. And I think this research is really interesting to also see, because we look at media viability through very structural or very through definitions. But if you actually ask the people, for them the audience is more important. It's important for them to be building trust, to be building reliability within them. And I think when we're thinking of media viability models, we also need to center the audience, what they want, and how they're going to also be benefiting. And also, for media viability for the partners, it's also really important that editorial integrity is kept. And I think that is really important, because sometimes with donor funding, what happens is that editorial control is lost by the people who are actually making the content because of funding priorities and the way the donors are looking. And so I think this is really important when we're thinking to actually center it to the voices of those who are being impacted by it. So there's a lot of research and there are a lot of findings, but the four that we really want to focus on and kind of highlight here is dealing with the dilemma between editorial independence versus donor priorities. Also looking at how AI can be used more effectively and efficiently, but not to be used as a tool for erasure and marginalization, which is what the partners are fearing at the moment. Also really important, and I think it's the most interesting part of our research, is to see how the role of trust, access, and language plays in editorial and funding decisions. What are some of the challenges that are kind of posed through this? And then what are effective revenue models? What are some of the challenges? And these are more lessons from the ground, not what's in the literature, not what organizations in the global north are saying, but what is really happening on the ground. So to go to the first one, and what we want to really do is make sure that you can also see what the partners are saying. So for us, for the partners, it's really important that they don't have to adjust their content based on what donors want to hear. what the donor timelines are and what donor themes are. So our partners on the ground are saying our editorial calendar is basically a grant calendar, because everything that they have to do, they have to kind of center it around what the donor wants to hear. And what happens as a result is that a lot of things and a lot of material or a lot of issues that they want to highlight are not being able to be highlighted because there's no funding for it, or partners then, donors then also have to then become a bit hesitant to fund you. And then, so what happens is content is filtered through what will get funded versus what must be said, because there are lots of issues that need to be highlighted, but there's no money for it. And so sometimes they have to do a form of self-censorship, and I think that is something, when we're thinking of media viability, that is a challenge. We have to make sure that the people are saying exactly what the challenges are, what the problems on the ground are, and that is something that is proving to be a challenge, and then proves to be a challenge when we think about media viability as well. What also happens is that the grants are typically tied to short and thematic cycles. So we have core funding versus direct funding, and what partners feel is that sometimes they have to talk about things that perhaps is not important, it's not relevant, especially with their audiences. And that doesn't really leave room for, firstly, continuity, but also reflection and then relationship building with the audiences, because ultimately we're serving the audiences that are looking at our content, that are looking at the partners' content. And this kind of becomes like a way that partners then decide, okay, we're not going to publish what's important, but what will get us the money. And I think that becomes a problem when we think about media viability, because it's not just about financial viability, it's also about what are the issues that are being highlighted. And also, it's really important to remember that the context is very different. So what's happening in China is very different from what's happening in Tunisia, it's very different from what is happening in Nigeria. And I think it's really important to remember that these local contexts play a very, very big part in how donor priorities are and how they should shift to ensure that these voices and problems are being highlighted. For us, it's at RNW Media, we're also looking at how AI is being used. And currently what's happening is there are many ways in which AI is being used by our partners. So we asked 124 of our partners if they're using AI, and 84% responded that they are in different tasks. And this is a really, really important figure, because if 84% of our partners are saying that they're using AI, it's really important to see how AI is being used and how it can be used for effectiveness and efficiency. So currently, for example, AI is being used as a tool to increase speed, to increase efficiency, and making sure that there's more personalization that ensures that the audiences are actually relating to the content that's being used. And that is really important, because that ensures that there's more trust in the content that's being put out, there's more reliability in the content that's being put out. And AI has been organizations are now using AI to solve big problems, to make it more efficient, to make everything faster, especially given that the situation in the world just changes day by day. You have to know what the trends are, you need to know, and AI is a way to make sure that you're listening to what the audience is actually saying and then changing your content accordingly. Also, it's also used as a tool to analyze user behaviors, and I think this is really important. We have tools that, for example, would do social listening. They make sure that these then reflect in content strategies, in editorial calendars, and I think this is really, really important, because it helps also in the ways that business models function, to make sure that if people are using content monetization, what are the things that will actually get their impact out there, which will get their message out there and feed into a more reliable digital ecosystem. So of course, with AI, this slide is a bit more heavy, because we are seeing that there are lots of concerns. But these concerns are things that I think we should be using, and we should be making sure that when we're doing advocacy around AI, when we're doing advocacy around tech accountability, these are the sort of the biases that our partners and people on the ground, the people who are making this content, they're challenged with. So this includes bias in training data. There's also a loss in human storytelling, and there are many platforms that are suppressing content. And I think this is important, because when you're suppressing content, especially in specific languages, so there are many partners who said Arabic is flagged much more, local languages are flagged because this is not something that's trained in the model. And when that happens, when you're using content monetization as a business model, it becomes a problem because how are you then even getting your message out when that is being flagged, when it's being taken down? And then that also impacts, in the end, how you're fundraising, because how can you go and ask for money when you can't show the impact that you are doing? And that then it becomes a very vicious cycle where your content is not out there, you're not getting more funding because you have the right stories, you have the right words, they're just being flagged by the platforms themselves. And then of course this also is very different in different contexts. So it's very different from what we're seeing in the Middle East and North Africa, very different in Africa, and then we're also seeing it very different in Southeast Asia. So it's also really important when we're thinking about how these platforms are restricting partners and people on the ground. It looks very different in different contexts. And one of the other things that I think is the reason why people are a bit hesitant to also embrace AI is how it's used as a tool of surveillance now. And I think this, when we're thinking about tech accountability, when we're thinking and speaking to governments, when we're speaking to policymakers, it's really important to also see how AI is being used by them and how that can also then be something on the agenda when we're thinking about AI advocacy. And so language, trust and access then becomes a very important thing when we're thinking about media viability, because language is not just a tool, it ensures that you build trust with the community that you're serving to make sure that there's reliability. And this is, when we speak to our partners through the surveys, through interviews, it's a very constant theme that's coming up, which is language is really, really important. And what happens is a lot of times organizations have to stay visible and to donors, and they can only do that through posting content in English. What happens with that is if you're a community based in Lebanon, like why would you be posting in English? Like Arabic is the one that will then make the audience trust you a lot more. So what happens is that English then it makes you lose connection with the local audiences, and this becomes a really big problem because you're not reaching the people. So what's the point in making content if it's not speaking to the people that you're serving? And then it's also that to translate these materials into other languages is also very costly. And there's not enough funding. So when donors are thinking about funding and when we're thinking about media viability, things like translation or thinking about how local languages can be incorporated in the work that they're doing, it's really important that donors start looking at this. And when we're thinking about media viability, this is not left out, because this is what the people on the ground are saying is important and a challenge. And also, it's really something that I want to highlight here, and this is something that all of our partners are telling to flag in every sort of, everywhere we get to speak, is about how funders should support local language proposals, how they should ensure that they're prioritizing translation efforts. Because yeah, you don't have the writing in English and writing the right words and seeing the right words. It's hard and it's costly and it takes time, and not everyone whose English is their native language, they struggle with this. And I think it's really important because language builds trust, language builds reliability, because for a good digital ecosystem to survive, you need to make sure there's continuity. It's not like one day you're posting like this and you're posting this. You have to make sure you build trust with your audiences as well. Am I very over time? Yeah. Also, so what are some of the ways that people are diversifying their revenue, and what are some of the challenges that are coming? So the challenges are, they're very straightforward. They're structural. They're, for example, if you want to do content monetization, if you want to do crowdfunding, there's not digital payment access. There's low audience purchasing power, and then sensitive topics such as power, politics, gender, human rights. These are things that are restricted on platforms, and that's why it's really important that we're also pushing, when we're thinking about media viability, is talking to the platforms, to talking to big tech, making sure that they know all the problems, and then they can be part of the solution. And so what's being tried right now, each one comes with a challenge. But the three ones that our partners are really looking at, especially given the funding cuts, the first one is the social enterprise model, which is basically you offer digital services, consultancies, and trainings. And it's something, for example, in Kenya, this was highlighted many times, about how they use alumni and the people that they've worked with previously to offer and design services. But this requires strong delivery capacity, which also requires funding. And it needs time. So it needs time to build trust, you have to build relationships, you have to have consistency. And these are things when you're doing funding cycles that are very thematically linked and time-bound, then it becomes a problem. The fee-for-service model is also one that many organizations are looking at, which is to charge for workshops, for skills training, where organizations, for example, one in Uganda, they're starting to charge NGOs for media trainings. It might not bring in a lot, but this is really important when we're thinking about media viability, is not to just have one funding stream, but have multiple funding streams that ensure that your organization is also surviving. And then, yeah, it requires staff, and I think that costs money. So everything goes back to the money, but it's really important to remember that there's a lot of nuances within, and there are lots of elements within when we're thinking about media viability. And the one that's really popular and that I think people are trying to see what are some of the ways that they can do it is crowdfunding. But they don't, a lot of the times what happens is that organizations in specific countries, for example in Tunisia, is that they don't have a big enough community. And the reason they don't have the big enough community is, again, the same thing, censorship, making sure that there's consistency, there's not enough funds to ensure that. And then a lot of course, things like mobile payments are not really, it's not very common in many places, and there's a lot of, it's not part of the culture. Like a lot of our partners said, like journalism should be free. Like it's not something that should be paid. This is like an expectation from the state. And I think this is, it's very interesting when you hear this, because these are these expectations, and the theory says this, and the literature may say this, but the ground reality are very different. I think I will just quickly skip over this, but I think what's really, really important is that there is no one universal model. So what we need to make sure is that when we're thinking about media viability, is to have a toolkit and not a template. And I think this is really important because viability is contextual, it changes, and there are many factors such as legalities, audience trust, but we have to just make sure that when we're thinking about media viability, we don't just think there's one solution. So,
Thank you so much, Bruce and Sana. I want to emphasize this is ongoing research, and if your organization want to be part of it, please contact Bruce and Sana. And once we have this research, definitely we are going to circulate in all the advocacy network we are having, including the founders and donors, and also the association organization like GFMD, for example.
and also if there's, because this is ongoing, if there's some data points that you think we should incorporate, or if there's anything that you think, we should include, or people we should speak to, please also reach out. And
we may, if I may, we may have notes mention some of the literature that we have used, such as I see you are here, Laura. So I think it's good to acknowledge your work on the manifesto as well. We have acknowledged it, of course, in the report. But it's very useful work. It provides the foundation. So we are also capturing all those insights, and I'm sure you're going to be telling us more about it. But just to acknowledge your work as well and contributions.
Okay, and considering the time, because we started late, I want to leave all the questions. For example, if you have any questions, let's leave into the networking moment. And thank you so much. And Bruce, please. Okay, let's have a really short panel discussion. I want to invite not only Bruce, but also Laura Moore from the Dutch Welle Academy, Lynn Itani from Rosif 22, and also Walter. Okay, let's have a short panel discussion. You can move here a little bit. Yes.
give it forward.
Well, okay, let's get started. I have some questions for each of you. At the same time, I also have some open questions. Except the people here, we also have some people online. We are live broadcasting on the Instagram. So I will start from Laura. Okay.
Sorry.
Let's look into international first. Okay, I know, Laura, you have been leading together with international media support and some organizations, and you guys developed a media viability manifesto. Can you elaborate a little bit? Yes. Can you elaborate a little bit where this initiative comes from, and what's the content insight from this document, and also what's your plan for the implementation in the future?
Thank you, May. A lot of questions. I will try to take on a little bit of what Courtney said, but also what you said now. Because it's all important for where this Media Viability Manifesto came from. So, I mean, we've been working on this topic, a lot of us, for a long time, before the disruption of the US money now, before these rapid AI developments. And I think what we realized is that we talk a lot about media viability and media sustainability and stuff, but we rarely really know what we mean. And your slide showing, you ask people what is media viability, and you get a lot of different answers to that. And that's a problem. There's media viability, there's media sustainability, there's resilience, media resilience, and there's a lot of concepts that we talk about, but very little conceptual clarity. And I'm speaking from an international media development organization's perspective. We often talk to donors as well, and trying to convince them to support media outlets around the world. And if you say media viability is important, then they say, what is that actually that you're doing in your projects together with partners? And then you get 15 different answers if you ask 15 people. It's not really credible, and it's a problem. We had a situation where one and the same donor launched a project on media viability and another one on media sustainability, and we said, what do you mean? And they said, well, I don't know, what you tell us. Right? So, okay, this is the moment when we came together as 13 international media development organizations, saying, okay, we need to have clarity on what we're talking about, and we need to have a strategy of what we're trying to achieve when we want to support media viability together with partners around the world. So this is basically what this Media Viability Manifesto, I think, achieved. So you said that it's not about having one solution, and I totally agree. It's not only about money, and it's not about having one solution, but I do think we need to have one basis for discussion so that we're talking more or less about the same thing. And then there's a lot of nuance and a lot of different aspects and stuff. If we don't agree on the basics, then the conversation is going to be very difficult. So this is what it does. There are definitions of, at least, we had consultations, we talked to a lot of people. Obviously, international media development organizations have a lot of partners and a lot of decades of work. So there is several hundred people contributed to this, and we agreed for the first time on a concept of what we're talking about. And I think even more importantly, there is a strategy of what we want to achieve when it comes to media viability, and what are the small steps that will help us get there. And this is basically that. It looks super complicated, it kind of is also super complicated, but what it does is it tells you, okay, if you want to reach media viability, this is what you have to do. And that doesn't mean one person or one organization has to do all of this, but it basically identifies 4 pillars of areas of work if you want to improve media viability. And this is research and insights. You need to have the data, you need to have audience data, but also, funders, for example, need to have data why we should support media. And then the business and technical side, everything that RNW Media, Dutch Welle Academy, a lot of organizations do with like training, consulting on business models and stuff. It's obviously a big and very nuanced field as well. coalitions and partnerships of different actors, super important, and evidence-based advocacy. And I think this map helps different stakeholders working on media viability. It helps us to talk to donors and say, look, this is where we are quite good at potentially, this is where we are weak, here is where we need more money. But it also helps organizations, our partners, to say, okay, this is, we're already focusing on this, but we're not on that. Maybe we work with IMS on here, but maybe we still want to engage more in advocacy or something. But it helped us as international organizations a lot. Thank you. It helped us to identify that we're very weak when it comes to advocacy as media development organizations. And this is, and I'm going to finish, this is the question of what we will be doing with this, or what we are already doing. There's now 22 organizations around the Media Viability Manifesto, so it's a document, but it also is an initiative, and I would even call it almost a bit of like a movement, as in like there are organizations coming together to really exchange on this topic and work on advocacy when it comes to media viability together. Have joint language, have joint messages, approach EU representatives or other, representatives in the of the national governments that we work in, to really make the case for media. And this is where we are, and I think that hopefully answered your question.
Yes. Thank you, because I was part of the consultation process for the Media Viability Manifesto, and honestly speaking, I was also personally getting inspired by this piece of work. I think some people have misunderstanding. I think some manifesto serve as more like an international framework. It doesn't have, you cannot understand this one as more like a universal formula for you to help you to achieve your long-term media viability. I don't think so, because in different countries there are different solutions. But at least we provide something you can contextualize in the future in your work, right? Okay, and my next question is, during our earlier conversation, I know Dutch Welle Academy also working with many partners. You're also looking into the intersectionality between the media viability and AI. And I heard from you, the Dutch Welle Academy is developing a resource center regarding to the media viability and AI. Can you elaborate a little bit what this resource center is really about and how we can contribute?
Yeah, so we heard and saw Courtney. I've heard Courtney, I don't know how many times talk. She's very emotional, and we get the sense of urge, but if you're not used to the technical side and the complexity of, racks and everything that we saw here, and I think this was even a non-technical talk from her, and you get lost very quickly. You feel that something is going wrong. We potentially understand maybe 10% of what's going wrong, but I think the problem really is that it's so complex and so hard to understand that we also need media to report on this more. We need the public, our audiences, us as citizens, to understand why this is a problem, and why we have potentially made a mistake already with social media and Meta and everyone, and now it's, we have the same situation again, or similar one, maybe even worse one, with AI. So this resource center is really looking at providing easily digestible, easily understandable information for journalists, hopefully, or material to report on this topic that we heard from Courtney. What we have at the moment, there's databases of information on media and big tech. You almost need a PhD to understand a lot of these resource centers, I would say, or information databases, because it's so highly complex that you get lost, even if you want to start and report on this more. So this is why we thought, okay, together also with others, we need to really make this topic more approachable for people or for journalists to report on. Because, and this is the last point, I think a lot of the times, I don't know whether that was also something reflected in your research, journalists and media houses think of AI, of okay, how can we use that for our content, our journalistic work, but the economic implications for our media houses of AI is something that is not very often discussed. And I think we need to get better at this.
Thank you. And I'm going to move to Lin. And Lin Itani is a product and development manager from RNW. RNW is one of the leading independent media in MENA region. Of course, you guys also have the English language website, right? And you have a really big influence in MENA region. My first question for you is, I know due to the US aid funding cut, and the RNW was also heavily influenced by this. How is RNW how is RNW now?
So we basically lost around 70% of our funding with what's happening in the world right now. It's not just US aid, it's also Europe, right, with the rise of the right. And so right now the way we're doing it is we already kind of prepared for that in the sense that we started a membership program, but this is absolutely not enough. It doesn't even cover my own salary, so it's really something that needs work, and I think you also discussed this, right? It's not in the culture necessarily, it's not something that is completely viable. So we have that on one side. On the other, we also are exploring basically giving services. So whether it be creating content, giving trainings, but even for our members, for example, we give trainings. This is what we give in return because we have this logic of journalism needs to be free, so we don't have paywalls, for example. So that's another one. And then something that we're exploring but not actually doing yet, because the others we have, is actually starting an academy of our own. So really training people completely outside of Nasrasif, just starting an academy of our own. And so this is where we're standing, and it's honestly right now not a very stable place necessarily. But yeah, these are the options we are currently either doing or exploring. Licensing is another one, tools that we create, and we will talk about this a bit more later.
Yeah, thank you. Because RNW and RNW Media, we had some collaborations, and as far as I know, you are also a champion utilizing AI for many different purposes. As far as I know, I've heard from you guys is you are utilizing AI for SEO, for example. You are utilizing AI to generate the headlines for different articles, for different purposes. Can you elaborate a little bit how RNW is using AI, for what purpose, and also how you guarantee the utilizing AI is aligned with your journalistic ethic and values?
Maybe I'll start with the second part of your question. So the way we use AI is we do not ever use it to create content from scratch. So the logic right now is to rather use it to basically repackage our work and to make it more accessible to our audience. So at first we started kind of shyly. We started with a project that basically helps our SEO. So using AI to come up with titles that are then, of course, checked by our editors to improve basically the reach. On one end, summaries as well, because that also affects SEO. And within that same project that was supported by Open Society Foundation, we also started using AI to translate. Yeah, sorry for that. So basically, we had already started translating to English, but AI also helps us just quicken the process. And again, here there is the human in the loop coming in. So our English editor is checking everything, reworking everything for it to be, just checked really. So this is where we started, and then we kind of jumped from there to using AI tools basically this is where the repackaging comes in. And it was basically so we have a project that's called All Ears in English, or Yosifah Sama, there are Arabic speakers. And here we repackage basically our articles into first scripts and then audio content read by AI by cloning our own basically teams and members' voices with their approval, of course, and within like ethical guidelines that we basically created. Once we realized that, okay, this is something like when we use it for SEO SEO and translation, we hadn't yet thought of like the ethical side of it because we weren't really kind of frictioning with it in a sense. But once we started using people's voices, our own content, so our own content as in also content that is written by people who we work with, this is where you start like questioning yourself and how you're using AI, and this is where we really like put down, self-regulated basically, documents. And then right now what we're doing also is, so that project, All Ears, is live, and it's also in English, so you can also check it out and give us feedback maybe. And what we're working on right now is, again, the way I see it is also like still repackaging and kind of making our content accessible. We're working on a project called Ask Auntie, or Sarheldak. And basically it's a chatbot where people can go ask their sexual and reproductive health and rights related questions to like a quirky aunt that will answer them kind of freely in a way that is accessible also and not kind of scientific, while still giving them the right information. So that information is either coming from our own resources or resources of partners we trust, doing like partners basically, an RNW supported project that has to do with SRHR. So yeah, this is where we're at. And I guess maybe I'll speak a bit about like another challenge that we have is when we actually receive content that is created with AI. And this is where it gets like a bit more tricky because then you have to flag this and actually notice it. They should start with. But this is how we're doing it when we're creating content.
Okay, thank you. And considering the time, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the MENA regions. I want to move to Bruce and have some questions because you originally come from Africa, and I know you have been working in many different countries, especially in Africa, for example, like Ethiopia. I know you have a lot of experience in Uganda and many different countries. My first question to you is, are there any new trends you see integrated AI in citizen and community-based digital media initiative?
Thank you so much for the question. I think there are many initiatives that are going on. I think I'll just pick one since we're running out of time. One I was thinking that has really impressed me is in Uganda. It's called the Debunk Media Initiative. It was started by journalism students from Makerere University. As you may know, Uganda has the youngest population in the world. 78% of the country are aged 30 or younger. So you can imagine, I mean, if you're in Uganda, if you turn left, right, you are likely to see somebody who is young. There's not a lot of old people there. And of course, for AI, this is great, because this is a language that maybe these youth or young people at least understand. And what they do is they use AI for fact-checking purposes. So, of course, Uganda is semi-authoritarian, so most of their focus is not really on politics, but mostly on issues like health, especially like during the COVID-19 pandemic. They did a lot of work, develop their own app demystify some of the narratives that were emerging or that were being shared online, and it was very successful. I think it's a very good example of also what Sana was talking about, where they think about, they don't really have one revenue source. So yeah, how do they survive? They take any money as long as it meets the values, their values. So they also do trainings. So this is something that I really find creative and actually really, really good, because they go into communities, particularly in rural areas, because AI and technologies in many African countries, and I guess many regions in the global south, is really centered in sort of elite environment. In the city center, you must have a degree, you must be educated. But what they really do is to get out of Kampala to actually be in the rural areas to train older people about AI. And I mean, AI, as in notes, we're not talking of really too complicated, but starting with just ChatGPT, to think about, ask a question. What if you have a question? How do you ask this question and get an answer? And it's a good start, especially if you're somebody who grew up in an era where there was no technology. So they are, it's a young organization, and I've met. I'm working with them because we have decided to develop a summer school together. So we're going to take some Dutch students there, and they will work with Ugandan students to share ideas on digital features and apps and app developing to see how working together can actually help community engagement. So this is something that has really we got funding from the university to actually do this, because the university also really sees how it is quite important for young people to cooperate on these issues, because they all have diverse knowledge, and there is knowledge that is coming from the West that might be useful for them, and they interact. And building this project and working with this Debunk Media initiative has really been fascinating. So it's one, but we can talk about more, but outside, because otherwise there's a lot.
Okay.
With a little bit of drinks.
I still have many questions on my list, but I'm going to give the last question to Walter here. I know we already hear some story from MENA region, from Africa. I know RNW Media also we are working in 40 different countries, and maybe Walter can share with us, keep it short a little bit, regarding to I think from last year, RNW Media we try to further develop ourselves into an AI supported organization. Can you elaborate a little bit how we can transform from a digital media first into an AI supported organization? What we have done, what kind of lesson learned we captured, and also I think over the years under Media we also developed many local media initiatives, right? Local media brands. And 85% media brands are still surviving until now. So sometimes people ask me, what's the secret here? Can you elaborate a little bit regarding to what is our progress on AI, and also a little bit, maybe some best practice from the country partners we are working with on media viability?
Thank you. Actually, these are 8 questions in one, but I will try to answer them. So maybe to start with the AI part, I think that as I said at the start, we've always supported public interest media that we're using the digital space as their domain. So video first was for a long period of time the mantra, of course, audience first as well, but then we had the introduction of AI, and we realized early on that this would be a big game changer. So we had a big debate about it in the organization. What does it mean to us, and what position do we want to take? And at that time, I think with the introduction of AI, the discussion was mainly linked towards ethical use of AI and how it could potentially put a lot of content creators out of business, and how it would create a lot of fake news, and how it would harm copyright. So that was also the initial sentiment in the organization. But then we also said that, but it's also a tool, and we also should realize AI is here to stay. So we can fight it, or we can also embrace it. So we did the second, and you should know we have half of the team is based out of hardcore human rights activists. So we said, hey, how do we challenge ourselves? How do we embrace this new technology? So as I said, we at that moment said we're an AI supported organization. So we are using AI. We're embedding it actually in everything we're doing, but we're continuously critical in how we use it. So what we do not, for instance, is we do not ask it to create content, but we do ask it to help us set a strategy on content creation. We do ask it to help us in audience segmentation. So we do ask it, and we discussed it earlier as well, is that there's no country that is exactly the same in its digital media update. So you cannot say that young women are on Instagram and older guys are on Facebook. That's not true. So you should really analyze what the digital media landscape should look like. Here too, AI could be a tool to help you answer those questions with the data that is accessible. Also, if you put, and that is linked to some of the successes of our partners, is that if you put the audience first and the impact that you want to have with your stories, it's very mindful to realize what are the latest trends in the digital media landscape. So there too, AI is a tool that can help you discover those trends. And literally these days, every time, and most of our partners, by the way, are in that camera because we have a live stream on Instagram and we know that hundreds of our partners are there.
Wow.
Is that every time I ask a partner what's happening in your context, and we say, well, we moved from long reads to YouTube channels, we used to animation, we're using video, we're using these songs. The other day we did a survey of the songs that have bigger uptake on Instagram. So we're using the same tricks as digital marketeers are using, but in all of that, in the strategy setting, in the questions you're setting, AI is helpful. And then answering the other question is like the sustainability of our partners. In the end, we incubated a lot of digital only media outlets in very restrictive settings, and they all became independent in 2020, and 85% of them are still around. But that means that they're doing something right, and the thing that they're doing right the most is their relevance. And we addressed it, and it was also the outcome of the questionnaire. They're relevant towards their audiences. They're addressing the topics that mean something to their audiences. They're also speaking in a local language, which was also very much addressed in the presentation. And that means that the audience can identify themselves in the content that's being created. And I think that is the uniqueness of what we've been doing. So although, and we saw that in all the presentations today as well, is that although there are universal lessons to be taken from all that's happening, but what they did is they managed to infuse their content creation with the realities on the ground, managed to stay relevant in what they were doing, and that allowed them to have a continuous stream of funding coming their way. And we have some success stories, but yeah, maybe there too we will address them even more with a drink in our hand. But I think that to us is interesting that we managed to do that. But also I want to point out in the settings, like Yemen. Yemen was, it was part of a big civil war, and we had a media outlet that was addressing both the north and the south. And one of the points that the media brand was taking, they were tapping into the aspirations of young people in Yemen about their country. So the media was not taking a side, it was actually asking young people online, what makes you proud about your country? And that was the core element of the media brand by which they were producing content. So they managed not to polarize the society, but actually bring literally two warring parties together in a digital media space, which was about the topics that were about being a young person in Yemen. So many other examples, but I think the relevance of the media brands that we incubated made it that they're still around.
Oh yeah, you have microphone.
Okay. So any questions from the audience?
I got a quick question.
Okay.
It's also to us as well, because when we were, I'm from Brazil, by the way, to us, about Ask Auntie. I saw the other day this report about how Dutch youth are using ChatGPT instead of a therapist, and people are actually, like, a huge amount of youth are using it, but if you just give ChatGPT, like, act like a professional therapist, and this is a professional session, how can we also make sure that people will not do this, whether it's on Ask Auntie or like the other kind of chat also with Masaruna, the one with the Love Matters Nigeria. How can we guarantee that people, like, yes, they can take our words for granted because we know we are sure of the sources, but how can we not replace a sexologist or a gerontologist or these kind of people?
Who want to answer?
I would like to start. I think it's a very good question, I think what is really important is to think about AI literacy in the first place. Literacy, which basically means that, in as much as today we have been talking, all of us, maybe more about the opportunities in AI, we also need to think about the challenges, the problems associated with it, right? Because I think that sometimes is lacking. Obviously, I feel that in as much as I speak really positively about AI, I also realize that for some of these young people particularly, you realize that it can mean also end of critical thinking anymore, right? So I think it's important to also not just promote as in like, wow, it's going to change the world. Now, we are going to have, dentists from AI. I think it's important for people to understand that there are also problems from AI. It's not like it's going to change the whole world. The problem is sometimes that is what is lacking. People only discuss the positive side. And I think if we are doing that, we are also doing a lot of harm, especially to people who are born or who are raised in circumstances where they didn't know about it. I think we need to give a true picture about the problems that it brings. I'm sure my colleagues also maybe want to add one or two things. Yeah.
Maybe I'll speak about that particular example, especially that it has to do with SRHR, so it's also quite sensitive. The way we've thought about it is that it always gives you kind of references and then tells you what you would need to check your profession. So kind of also addressing basically the limitation of the tool and not making it sound like it could replace a profession. But that's something you can control when you're creating the tool. But then
when it goes out,
then it goes back to the literacy.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions or maybe comments?
One small question, not a small question. Regarding all of the examples you gave from all over the world, what could be done to maybe inspire Western-oriented journalists or managers within the journalistic sector to, look into these things happening all over the global south? What practical steps could be taken to have the gaze shift to these initiatives in the global south?
By the way, Jess is my PhD student. I'm proud. Thank you. I'm sorry.
You know the answer. I have one thing what I found very interesting in this dynamic of this crisis now, and you made the point a little bit about, for many media houses, this situation that everyone, I think we as in the global north, feel with the lack of the US aid money, and we feel like we are in crisis, and a lot of the partners say we are always in crisis, right? We don't know what not so it's a bit like we can learn, as you said, a lot from them about preparing for crisis or living through crisis, and about resilience and stuff. And I think this is really, we see that there's some, again from this media support perspective, there's some organizations that did not imagine USAID money stopping, and 80% of the funding came from the US or even more, and now it's gone and the organizations are gone. And I think there is a lot to learn about really preparing and acting quickly for crisis, and then in the situation of crisis, being able to act quickly. And learn a lot about preparing to go into exile, for example, from a lot of media houses. And this is a different situation, but I think definitely this whole feeling of how to deal with crisis.
Yeah, just to add, I think we need to facilitate this conversation between the South and the North. I mean, it always sounds bad when you say South and North because it almost seems like it's a divide, right? It's like you already identified that people are different. But I think, obviously, historically, there are reasons why there are those differences. And I think we can do a lot, and all of us, we can play a big role here by facilitating the conversation between people living in different contexts. I always have a feeling like maybe your organization, RNW Media, is a very good example to show that because it's based in the North, but it's working a lot in the Global South. And what you really see is for many people. There is still that stereotypical approach of like, yeah, what can I learn from someone from Lebanon? What can I learn from someone from Brazil? I mean, I think those people are missing a lot. If you start from that perspective, you are going to miss a lot because what you actually realize now is, there is, of course, historically, there was lack of access to opportunities. Young people who are coming out of these countries are completely different in terms of understanding things than maybe 40, 50 years ago. So I think what we need is to facilitate, and that's why we did that, this summer school. That's exactly because of that. Because the university supports it, because it realizes that if you want, if you want a holistic future for young people, you need to help them interact. Not help, divide them further by saying, oh, you're from Brazil, you're different than you're from here. Because, the issues that we deal with, as Laura said, they're almost always the same. It's just about how do we do it together? How do we identify the problems and think about the solutions together? And thanks to the digital technologies today, you can do it also online. So it's for me that's really the future. That's something that really needs to to be done. This sort of the decolonization of this idea to say of the mindset to say, well, what can I learn from someone from this? Or also you also see from that side there's also that perception that the people coming from here they know it all. So there, that becomes a problem. Maybe you want to add? Oh.
Okay. Considering the time, let's stop here. And thank you so much for attending this session. And thank you, and wish you have a nice afternoon. Let's move to the garden and have continue our conversation. Thank you so much.